Hello varlets, welcome back to another weapon review video. This time, we're taking a look at the Vraks 3 Headhunter Autogun. It's a 3-shot burst rifle that holds a special place in my inventory of all my characters, and today we'll be peeling back the layers to learn what makes this gun feel so good and so deadly. Here are 5 things you need to know about the Vraks 3 Headhunter Autogun. Number 1. Damage profiles. The Vraks 3 has an interesting damage profile. First off, the damage numbers you read here are on a per bullet basis. So if you want to know what a full burst of 3 bullets deals, multiply the numbers here by 3. Looking through the damage it deals to the different armor classes raises some eyebrows. Like for instance, why does the Vraks 3 deal a little bit more body shot damage to flak armor but deals more weak spot damage to unarmored enemies? I have no idea how to explain these numbers, but I'll take it as it being an interesting feature about the weapon and leave it at that. Now, looking at what sort of breakpoints this weapon lands on naturally, we see that on a single bullet by bullet basis, it can almost take out scab shooters and poxwalkers on weak spot hits on the first shot of a burst. But since this weapon is fired in bursts of 3, we can calculate breakpoints for a full burst. What we get from this is that a full burst of 3 bullets has the potential to one-shot many enemies, and depending on the enemy in question. We'll explore this in more depth as we learn more about the gun. Number 2. Range and recoil control. As far as range goes, because this weapon does not have a range stat, its fall-off start and end range are the same no matter the base weapon rating of the gun. Here's a handy table to help you understand the fall-off numbers of the weapon. So, from the table on screen, we see that this weapon starts to experience damage fall-off at around 15 meters. From this distance and beyond, the Vraks 3 will steadily start to deal less damage until around 37.5 meters, at which point, it reaches the damage floor of 80%. That means, even from beyond 37.5 meters away, the Vraks 3 will continue to deal 80% of its damage at a minimum. As far as fall-off range damage goes, only losing about 20% of the damage is pretty damn good. Looking at the table, you'll also probably notice something. Both hipfire and ADS share the same numbers, so is there any difference between the two? The answer is yes. Your recoil settles back to its neutral state much faster when you are ADSing. This makes it easier to control your recoil when you are firing multiple bursts in a single magazine. The fact that your recoil settles faster in ADS will also play a role when it comes time for build recommendations, so keep that in mind. Number 3. Body shot and beyond. Given what we've seen so far about weapon damage stats and breakpoints, its range and recoil patterns, the first thing that came to my mind was, I wonder if I can just use this weapon as a body shot weapon and not bother for headshots. So I did just that, and my god, this weapon is terrifyingly consistent at body shot killing. Even at ranges it has no business being good at. Because the breakpoints for this weapon are calculated by per burst, and because it has a very high damage floor of 80%, modding this weapon a little allows you to maintain your lethality from short to medium ranges, where it operates the best, and extends it to distances way further than expected. A characteristic of all burst fire weapons is that because they always fire multiple rounds, sometimes you end up wasting bullets on things that die on the first or second hit. A skill you can work on for the Vraks 3 is to learn how to spread your burst while aiming for headshots. If the first bullet of a burst were to kill an enemy outright, you can instead acquire new targets mid-burst and deal damage to them instead. This helps to increase the damage efficiency of each of your bursts so that every bullet is actually contributing towards your damage output instead of hitting a corpse or hitting the environment. The main limiting factor for this weapon is your own recoil compensation and your ability to acquire targets. This means this weapon has a very high skill ceiling as well. If you practice with it and learn to manage its recoil, your performance with it not only improves, but your effectiveness with it at distance also increases. Just based off these findings, where a weapon is easily useful in the hands of players who don't have the best aim, but also becomes very deadly in the players who do, I rate this weapon E for everyone. Number 4. Burst fire and salvo mechanics. The Vraks 3 has a bunch of interesting mechanics going on whenever it fires a burst of bullets. But first off, let's establish some terminology to make sure everyone is on the same page here. A burst is a single trigger pull that fires 3 bullets from the Vraks 3. A salvo is any number of trigger pulls up until your weapon returns to its neutral position. Understanding the difference between the two is important because it affects the types of blessings we will choose when we get to the build recommendations. So, with that, here are a handful of things worth noting. First, when a burst would be considered a critical hit, all bullets in a single burst will count as critical shots. This means building crit chance can really up your damage output with it. Secondly, while crits affect the whole burst, the bullets within the burst are considered separate hits. That means landing all hits from a single trigger pull would count as you having hit an enemy 3 times. Again, this part is important to note because it affects your blessing choices. Number 5. Build recommendations. Given everything we've uncovered and learned about this weapon, I think there are two main build paths we can craft towards. To my pleasure, this weapon comes with a bunch of useful blessings that affords us numerous possibilities when it comes to build crafting for it. The first build is leaning into the weapon's ease of use nature and taking advantage of its forgiveness and strength when it comes to body-shotting enemies. Build number 1 is the Body Shot Barrage build. This build centers around the anchor blessing of No Respite, where you gain up to plus 20% damage on hit on a staggered enemy that scales with stagger. No Respite only works on enemies that already have been staggered by something and continues to stack until they recover from their stagger. Because the Vraks 3 fires a burst of 3 bullets, and because each bullet is counted as a separate hit, No Respite can activate within a burst, which essentially gives you a free plus 20% damage boost whenever you pull the trigger. But here's the thing, this works differently for body shots, or if you land a headshot on the first shot of the burst, and the type of enemy you are attacking. Since the Vraks 3 has very pitiful stagger on body shots, depending on the enemy you hit, you'll either activate No Respite on the second and or third shot of the burst. So, for example, on scab and drag bruisers and shooters that have very low stagger resist, the stagger from the body shot is enough to activate No Respite on both the second and third shots, which is a little overkill since they will probably die from a full burst even without it, but then it's never bad to make sure that they die. On the other hand, for something a bit more tankier, like a scab gunner which has higher stagger resistance, you'll need to land at least 2 shots from the burst to stagger them, meaning only the third shot from the burst will get the added damage boost from No Respite. This is where opening with a weak spot hit or a headshot comes in. Because headshots deal more stagger to an enemy, slightly beefier targets like the scab gunner can be staggered on the first shot of a burst if you land a headshot first. Doing so activates No Respite on both the second and third bullets in the burst. While you can absolutely try and land all headshots on your burst, I find painting enemies that need to be headshot first much easier when I want to take advantage of the damage boost from No Respite, since you don't have to deal with your target's stagger animations and risk missing shots. The next blessing to pair with No Respite to complete the build is Opening Salvo. Opening Salvo grants you up to plus 15% power on the opening shot of a salvo. This is where all our talk of salvo and recoil and ADS we had earlier comes into play. Opening Salvo only affects the first bullet of your burst, meaning the plus 15% power bonus doesn't affect the second and third bullet. Now, you might be thinking, only the first bullet of a salvo? That means if I use the weapon to rapidly take down multiple enemies in quick succession, I won't be benefiting from it? The answer to that is yes and no. Because the salvo resets when your aim returns to its neutral position, and your aim returns to its neutral position much faster while ADSing, Opening Salvo gets a near 100% uptime on all your bursts as long as you pace yourself. Let me show you the difference between them. So, as you can see here, it's only when you lay on the trigger that Opening Salvo stops working. The difference between hip firing and ADSing is also very clear. When firing while ADS, you practically can have Opening Salvo up all the time. On top of this, since Opening Salvo increases your power on the first shot, this means it technically also increases the stagger strength of your first bullet. While this might not mean a lot since the Vraks 3's stagger strength is so low to begin with, the fact that this blessing synergizes with No Respite is just too great to not pair with it. So, to recap, our first build is the Body Shot Barrage build that is focused around making the Vraks 3 a very forgiving and very easy to use weapon that doesn't skimp on the damage output. This is the most consistent and versatile build you can pick up. The second build leans towards maximizing the damage output of the Vraks 3 and tries to reach the ceiling of its damage potential. This build is the Monster Hunter build and is focused on destroying tanky targets like Reapers, Demon Hosts, Plague Ogrins and Beast of Nurgles, but can hold its own against regular shooters as well, though not as effective as the first build. This build centers around the anchor blessing of Headhunter, where you gain up to plus 5% crit chance on weak spot hits that stacks up to 5 times for a total of 25% crit chance, and resets once you land a crit. Going back to what we learned about the bullets in a single burst being separate attacks, means the Vraks 3 is able to rapidly reach the stack limit of Headhunter. Every time you land a burst on a weak spot, you can add up to 3 stacks in one go. This means that within 2 bursts of a weak spot, you would have a plus 25% crit chance buff that does not disappear until you land your next crit, which, as we learned earlier, will apply to the whole burst. From here, we have a choice for the next blessing. We can lean into having more crit chance with the recently buffed Surgical Blessing. This increases your crit chance as you ADS, maxing its stacks at around 1.5 seconds of ADSing without firing. This blessing works best if you are using the Vraks 3 with measured shots, taking your time to ADS instead of laying on the trigger, and is more suitable for long distance firefights. Alternatively, You can ramp up the damage of your crits with Deadly Accurate, where you gain plus up to 50% more critical weak spot damage. The Vraks 3 has a crit and weak spot multiplier of 90%. Having Deadly Accurate increases this multiplier up to 135%. This blessing pairing is most destructive when you can lay on the trigger and score repeated weak spot hits, making this weapon incredibly powerful against monsters that have their weak spot exposed or are stationary. Finally, for our third build, we have the Balance build that is some combination of the first two. You could opt to create a Vraks 3 that is a combination of both the Anchor Blessings from both builds, No Respite and Headhunter. This build gives you the best of both worlds in that you have a damage boost from No Respite against shooters, bruisers and gunners, but also have the burst DPS potential of Headhunter against tanky targets which can't be staggered by the Vraks 3 alone. Because crit body shots have the same stagger strength as weak spot hits, having Surgical with No Respite makes it such that if your burst were to crit, the first shot would stagger your target as if you hit them in the head, which would activate No Respite for the damage boost for the next 2 bullets, which will also crit as well. As for perk selection, I'd recommend taking plus flak damage against elites and further enhancing your lethality against scab enemies. This also helps you reach the 1 bullet breakpoint against scab shooters so you can better distribute the damage to more targets. Depending on which build path you take, the other perk can either be plus elite damage or plus unarmored to further reinforce your versatility against regular enemies. If you are going for the monster hunter path, taking plus unyielding damage further improves your burst DPS against these larger threats. I was thinking about whether to include plus maniac damage, but because the damage against maniac enemies is already pretty low, I think it benefits the weapon to lean more into what it's good at rather than trying to compensate for a weakness in this case. Well, this review turned out a lot longer than I thought. Who knew such a weapon would have a lot of hidden mechanics and interactions going on for it? Overall, I love this weapon a lot, and while I have them on all my characters that can farm them, my vet, who has the greatest potential to maximize this weapon, is now so plasteel poor that he's been stuck using the first one he got.
You're not wrong! Best not to think about it!
What do you mean not to think about it? You are literally the poorest out of all my other characters. Even my Psyker has a better Vraks 3 than you. We shall solve this by having you do all the highest complexity contracts from Melt.
Damn it, I'm down!
Oh, you, ever the drama queen. Anyway, thank you all for watching. I hope this review has been enlightening and of use to you. As always, consider dropping a like or subscribing if you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you all in the next one. Varlets.